Here are 5 ridiculous myths about freight brokering that we need to clear up right now. What's up, Freight Broker Network, and welcome back to the Freight Skills channel. I'm glad to have you back for another video. And like we just said in this video, we're going to talk about 5 freight brokering myths that we need to put to rest. All right, we're going to talk about things from the standpoint of carriers, customers, and brokers. 5 of the most common things that I see being spoken about in Facebook groups, forums, and just directly when I speak to people in general about freight brokering. All right, so before we get into myth number 1, make sure you like this video and subscribe to this channel. If you haven't already, make sure you go down in the description and join my free group. That's the best place to get access to me. I hang out in there all day with a bunch of other brokers, new and old. So that's the best place for you to get help in a supportive way. There's no hate or negativity at all in there. If you're a carrier, dispatcher, or freight broker, I will let you in. Just go down to the description and click that join button, invite yourself in. So without further ado, let's get into 5 ridiculous myths about freight brokers that need to get put to rest from the perspective of a freight broker of 15 years. So the first myth about freight brokers that people just don't seem to understand is that brokers do not control rates. All right, there is a myth that brokers are the reason why carriers get low rates, and this couldn't be farther from the truth, and I'm going to explain why and why it's spreading. It's spreading because there's a lot of inexperience in the industry who hear something, take it as gospel, and then go to Facebook groups and fight with carriers and other brokers and dispatchers and shippers about how brokers are the reason that rates are so low. And this usually comes from carriers who transition into the brokering side. And while their heart is in a good place, carriers who transition to the brokering side always have a soft spot for carriers. They're always looking out for their carrier brothers and sisters more so than anybody else, right? And they want to get the highest rate for their friends, right? What that turns into is a few brokers new to the game coming in and seeing the kind of profit margins people are making, and they'll start going around and telling their network, like, look at what these people are doing to us. Look at all this money that we're missing out on. Freight brokers do not control rates. None of them ever do. Carriers, if you get a rate from a freight broker, the shipper gave them a rate to go off of, and they lowered it a little bit to make a few percentage points for setting you guys up. That's how it works. Freight brokers do not sit and give shippers what they should be paying. Shippers dictate what they want to pay. Freight brokers put it out into the market. And guess what? The market picks up the freight from there. If you've taken an economics class or read any kind of literature about economics, markets are perfect. I think the term is perfectly elastic. What that means is if a load is worth $2,000, it will move at $2,000 regardless what you or Uncle Joe or Driver John says. The freight will move at what it's worth every single time. If some lowball carrier is willing to take a $2,000 lane for $1,500, that's what that lane is worth. Is it right? No, but that's just the way of the world. And the sooner that you can accept that and stop complaining and fighting about brokers manipulating rates, the better off you're going to be in life. Okay? So freight brokers do not manipulate or control rates of any kind. The best freight brokers understand that fact and go out to the market and refuse that freight from their customers. And that's how we operate. If a shipper comes to us with a lowball rate, we turn it down. We say, no, you want it from us? We're gonna pay our carriers something that they can turn their freaking truck on. That's what it comes down to. But non-educated and non-experienced brokers don't understand that they're creating a bad name for themselves and the industry by entertaining this freight. We won't entertain. I will gladly tell anybody who picks up the phone and calls me that I am the most expensive freight broker that they are going to speak to that day. If they choose to do business with us, that's great. If they don't want to do business with us, that's great too, because I'll lose money on them and I'll get a carrier mad. Our reputation is the number one thing that we have to protect as a freight broker. All right? And that goes for you too. So you have to adopt this mentality that you need to be looking out for your carriers and looking out for your customers. But guess what? Without carriers on this side, you don't exist. All right, and that's coming from a freight broker. Your carriers need to be treated with respect. You need to look out for them without them having to ask you to look out for them. All right, sorry for that little rant, but that's the truth. But the myth is busted. Carriers don't control freight rates. Uneducated carriers ruin freight rates, but they don't influence them. The shippers do their own job of telling brokers what to move things for. And that's a good transition into myth number 2, which is that brokers steal from carriers. Carriers, I don't know if you understand this fact, but if you are behind a truck all day doing work that is very physically intensive, very time consuming, and physically and mentally exhausted, it's a very difficult job that you do. You do not have the time that we have sitting in an office to call and negotiate with shippers. There are millions and millions of shippers around the world, in the country, all over the place. For every one load that we get, we probably made 60 to 70 phone calls to secure that load, okay? So what we make on that load, everybody's going to have their own opinion on it. Some people are gonna say it's unethical to make 25%. You ask a broker, they're gonna say, oh, that's a healthy margin. You could keep the lights on that day. All right, and because 25% does not always mean $3,000. 25% of a load could mean $25, or it could mean $150 or $250. But you have to understand that we're not always going to hit a home run. Brokers might make $300 on a shipment and then lose $300 the next day. Optimally, we're always profitable, but that's not always the case. So brokers are not stealing from carriers. Carriers are accepting the rates that they're willing to take a load for. Brokers are making a little bit of a commission for being the matchmaker between a shipper who doesn't pick up the phone and a carrier who doesn't have time to pick up the phone. Both of us have value to give to each other, and the difference over here on this side between the broker and the shipper has nothing to do with this side. Both deals are negotiated separately, all right? Because just like you say that the broker is stealing from the shipper as a carrier, the shipper can say that the broker is stealing from them with the carrier. The more the carrier's charging, the more the shipper's losing. The more the shipper's charging, the more the carrier's losing. It's a catch-22. The best way to approach this is to understand that both parties are operating independently. And I always teach this in all of my courses and all of my students. It is a carrier's responsibility to understand what they need to be profitable. It is a broker's responsibility to understand the carrier's perspective and to guide their customers in the right direction to paying fair rates. The more brokers that we can get on board, understanding that they play a significant role in the fairness of the industry and the rates of the industry, the better off we're going to be. I don't see us getting there anytime soon. There's too many new people entering the industry. Unfortunately, that's the fact. But over time, hopefully, with rate tools and transparency and things like that, things will get a little bit better. But the fact of the matter is, to bust this myth, brokers are not stealing from carriers. Brokers lose money just as much as carriers lose money. Deals don't work out in our favor. And just because our loss isn't a physical paper loss, like we're not throwing away $1,000 on a new tire set or spending money on maintenance and things like that. We are paying people's salaries, we're paying rent, we're paying computer expenses, we're paying with our time, right? Because remember, we don't get paid unless we perform. You get paid no matter what kind of a job you do because you are picking something up and delivering it. So you get paid for that work that you do. We only get paid on performance. So we're pretty much working for free until somebody gives us a load. So brokers are not stealing from carriers. So myth number 3 is a little bit different. This is from the perspective of a shipper. And there's this myth that freight brokers are more expensive to use than going direct to carriers. And why I say that is a myth is because brokers offer flexibility that going direct to carriers just does not offer. When you go direct to a carrier and a carrier falls off a load, if you are a shipper yourself, you now have to make 10 to 20 phone calls or more to put another carrier on that load. The carrier has no authority to give that load to another carrier or a broker, right? That's double brokering, that's illegal. that delay costs a shipper in headaches, time spent recovering it, customer dissatisfaction. If there's extra storage on the freight, that costs money, that costs time. Whereas if a broker was handling the transaction and that first carrier fell off, the broker would be able to find a new carrier, most likely at the same rate that they quoted for the first attempt. Freight brokers are not more expensive than going direct to carriers. Maybe in the short term and on paper, you'll see that, yeah, carrier rates are a little bit cheaper than if you use whatever brokerage. But in the long term, when you look at the unpredictability of the logistics industry, you'll see that in the long term, a broker can save you money because of the flexibility that you have with problems that are inevitably going to come up. Myth number 4 is that brokering is too saturated. Saturation is an interesting topic, and it can be said about just about any industry that it is saturated. The energy drink industry is saturated, the power bar industry is saturated, the baked goods industry is saturated, gas station industry is saturated. There's a gas station everywhere I go. Fast food, completely saturated. At this point in the world and in the global economy, there is nothing that we really need that we don't already have. Nobody's sitting at home and saying, oh, I really hope another energy drink company pops up tomorrow. That would be really good for me because I'm lacking in options. The same goes for freight brokering. I don't know if you understand the scale of how much a billion actually is. And even I have trouble digesting it sometimes. Put into perspective how much $1 billion of freight spend is, and look at the largest players in the freight industry, and you'll see how small, or how big rather, the freight brokering industry can possibly be. There is plenty of room for new brokers to enter. Obviously, the landscape is going to get more competitive, and you're going to need to have an edge on everybody else that's coming into the industry. But it is not by any means saturated. Everything is saturated to some extent. Is it competitive? Yes. But is it saturated? Absolutely not. There's plenty of room in just about every industry. As long as you do things right, you'll stand out, you'll be able to succeed in the long term as a freight broker. And now myth number 5 is that anybody can be a broker without training. Now, yes, anybody can be a freight broker. There's a very low barrier to entry as long as you have a few bucks to put together your licenses, a little bit of software, and a phone and an internet. Technically, yes, you can be a freight broker. But as far as being a broker without training, while it is possible, it is highly advisable, and you have about a 95% chance that you will fail in the first 3 to 6 months. Well, as long as the money lasts, that's how long you have to survive. Brokering and freight, although there's no formal education for it, it is a very highly regulated industry. There are a lot of ins and outs that come with every single freight niche. There's hazmat, for example. You have to understand placarding, hazmat interactions, what to do in case of a spill. With flatbeds, you have to understand dimensions. Different states have different weight restrictions and height restrictions. There's permitting to understand. You have to understand how rates are affected. There's so many different ins and outs of freight that can only be learned from experience and speaking and networking with people who know how to do what you want to do. While you can become a freight broker without experience or without education or anything, you can't be a freight broker without training because you just won't make it. You won't be successful unless you have a lot of resources at your disposal and people to ask and network about when problems come up. So I hope you enjoyed this rant. I actually planned this video to be a little bit more educational, but I just got really passionate about a lot of these topics and turned into a little bit of a mini rant. But you got to see my perspective as a broker on some of these myths that circulate the industry and how I feel about them. And hopefully I challenged your thinking a little bit. If I didn't, that's cool. Please go in the comments below and feel free to rebut me on anything that I said. I'd love to have a discussion about where you're at and what you think about some of these things. And even if you don't agree with me, if you do agree with me, it would help for some support in the comments if you let me know which of these myths I was able to bust for you, okay? So, like always, I do want to invite you to another platform where I like to discuss this stuff, and that is my free group. There's a link right in the description down below. Just click join the group and it will take you to a page. Just enter your info. I'll send you a personal invite. and I will let you in. You can introduce yourself, network, ask me questions, do whatever you want really. It is my safe space on the internet for freight brokers, dispatchers, and carriers to learn and grow together. So I hope to see you inside there, and I hope to see you on the next video. So make sure you subscribe to this channel, like this video to get this message out to more people on YouTube, and I will see you soon.